All right, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all doing well this afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get things started. So just a few housekeeping things. I'm going to keep everybody muted throughout the presentation, but I'm going to try to save a few minutes at the end for some question and answers. So you're welcome to unmute yourself at that time to ask a question. You're also welcome to turn on your video if you'd like. I always love to see people's faces, and not feel like I'm just talking to myself. So feel free to turn on your video if you'd like, but you certainly don't have to. I would love to make this as interactive as possible. So if you do have questions throughout when I'm going through the presentation, you can certainly use the raise hand feature, or you can type your question in the chat box. There's a chat feature. And you're welcome to chat your question or to raise your hand, and then I'll see it and you can unmute yourself to ask your question. But we do only have an hour, so I want to make sure to get through as much of the information as I can. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So you're here to learn about motivational enhancement therapy for addiction counseling in particular. Now, motivational enhancement therapy was previously called motivational interviewing. So I'm going to kind of use those terms pretty interchangeably throughout the presentation, and they're commonly used interchangeably. So this is kind of a broad overview of motivational enhancement therapy itself and how you can apply it to working with people with addiction related issues. So that's going to be the focus for today. So let me advance the slide here. So first of all, and sorry for a little bit of the blurry pictures there, but these are the two guys who originally developed motivational enhancement therapy, or motivational interviewing is what it was called when they first kind of coined the term. So William Miller and Stephen Rolnick, and they've written several books and have a lot of resources about motivational enhancement therapy in general. So I would encourage you to Google them. If you're interested in more in depth, you can certainly get the books. Those are very helpful. And the overarching goal of motivational enhancement therapy is really to help people overcome ambivalence, or kind of the natural resistance that comes around when we try to make changes in our behavior. So all of the skills that go along with motivational enhancement therapy that you can use with clients are couched in that goal to help people overcome their ambivalence to change and move through whatever resistance they might have, and ultimately make the changes necessary or that they want to make. So that's kind of the ultimate goal of motivational enhancement therapy. So there's 5 principles that guide everything that is done in motivational enhancement therapy. So kind of keep these in the back of your mind as we're talking through motivational enhancement therapy in general. So the first one is to express empathy. So one of the biggest things, when you think about a client that's coming in for maybe their first time to counseling services, or to, deal with their substance use issue, they're probably really scared. They're probably nervous and anxious, don't really know what to expect. And so one of the things we want to do is really express empathy, and that this is difficult, and this is a challenge to make changes in your life and to face whatever issues you're coming in to deal with. So a lot of what we want to do is just express that empathy, normalize their feelings, and help them feel comfortable and welcome to that this is a safe place that they can explore and deal with whatever issues they have. The second is to develop discrepancy. So looking at the ways in which they are kind of not living the way that they want to live, and look at what are the barriers, what are the challenges. So an example of how you might develop discrepancy is when someone talks to you about I really want to get clean and sober. I want to stop using. And they also tell you about how they only hang out with people that use. So that's an opportunity to develop discrepancy, because that doesn't really make sense. How can you get clean and sober and stay away from substances when you only hang around people that use substances? So those are and we'll talk about specific skills to utilize to develop discrepancy a little bit later, but that's an example of something that, doesn't quite line up to what the client's goal is, and that you would want to point out using motivational enhancement techniques and skills. The next is you want to avoid argumentation. So basically, you don't want to get in an argument with a client because it's kind of not worth it. And part of the idea with motivational interviewing and motivational enhancement therapy is to kind of help motivate them to change. And so when you get in an argument with somebody, that's probably not going to motivate them to want to make changes. It's probably going to do the opposite and really demotivate them and cause them not to want to make any changes at all. So that's a big piece, is to avoid getting in arguments with clients. The next one is to roll with resistance. So when you think about wanting to make changes, just think about for a second the last time you tried to make a change in your life. And there's a natural resistance to change and the change process, even when you know that you really want to make a change and it's really important that you make the change. There's still kind of an element of resistance just because it's different, it's new, it's unknown, what the change is going to look like and how it's going to be, how your life's going to be different when you make the change. And you're just not used to it, so when you make a change, you're not used to the change yet. You got to give it time. So part of the driving force behind motivational enhancement therapy is to roll with that natural resistance that comes along with making changes, and to acknowledge that that's part of the process. The next is to support self-efficacy. So we really want to kind of empower the client that they can do this and help them figure out ways that work for them to make the changes they want to make, and be supportive of them not only making the change, but also supporting their efforts. So even though they may not be successful all the time in what they're doing, but that they're making efforts and acknowledging that and validating how challenging it really is to make changes. So keep these 5 principles in mind, because that really guides all the skills and everything you would do with a client if you were using motivational enhancement therapy with a client. So the other piece to what motivational enhancement therapy is built on is the stages of change. And I think this is, common in terms of, I think a lot of people have seen the stages of change before. But if you look at the top up here at pre-contemplation, that stage of change is really where somebody's not interested in changing. They don't think they have a problem, and they're not interested in changing their behavior. So this might be characteristic of a client that you have that's a mandated client that is required to come to treatment or counseling for, maybe they're on probation, maybe they are trying to appease one of their family members or something like that. And, but they really don't think they have a problem. They really don't want to make any changes. They're just trying to appease an outside or external entity. So they would be in pre-contemplation if that were the case. So really they have not much motivation at all to make a change because they don't even really think they have an issue. So moving in a clockwise manner, contemplation is the next stage. And this is where somebody is aware that they have a problem. So they think they might have a problem, but they're not quite ready to do something about it yet. They really haven't committed to making changes. They've just become aware that, hey, this might be an issue. So an example might be, if somebody's drinking, they may say, I'm drinking a little too much, but I'm not ready to stop drinking or really cut down. I'm just recognizing that, maybe I drink a little too much every now and then. So again, they're not really motivated to take action and make changes, but they're starting to come into some awareness that there might be a problem here. There might be an issue that I may want to deal with or may want to explore. So next is preparation. And preparation is really where they've recognized they have a problem, that they've recognized they're ready to start doing something about the problem. And so they're starting to make plans and prepare, like the name says, prepare to take action. So they haven't quite done anything yet, but they've started to make those plans. So an example would be somebody who comes into counseling and is starting to talk about what they could do about their issue. Maybe they're talking about things that they've tried in the past. Maybe they're sort of brainstorming different ways that they might make changes this time around. So they're starting to really think about, what can I do? And maybe they're, starting to dip their toe in the water of change. So an example might be, they've started looking up different 12-step meetings online that they could go to, that might be in their neighborhood or, online, that at times that would be convenient for them. So they haven't gone yet to a 12-step meeting, but they've started to explore the possibility and what they might be able to do. So what would be convenient? So the next one here at the bottom is action. So the name is exactly what it is. They have taken action. So in our example of somebody looking for 12-step meetings, this would be that they've gone to a meeting and they've tried something. So they're actively trying to change behavior. Next over here is maintenance. So this means that not only have they made changes, but they've been able to maintain some changes. So maybe they've started to go to 12-step meetings a couple of times a week, and they're consistently going. And they're starting to see some benefits to the change that they're making. So whatever their new behaviors are replacing the old behavior. And then relapse is an optional stage. Not everybody relapses, but a relapse really is just falling back into old patterns of behavior. So it may not be an actual relapse where they use drugs or alcohol again, but it may be behavior patterns. So in our example of somebody who's going to 12-step meetings and they found success going to 12-step meetings in staying sober, and they stop going to 12-step meetings, that would be considered a behavioral relapse because they've stopped going, and that was the change that they engaged in. So they might actually relapse and use substances again, but it can also just be the behavioral piece. Now, just because somebody relapses doesn't mean that they go back and start all over again at pre-contemplation. You can really jump back to any stage after a relapse. So it kind of depends on what happens, during the relapse and as a result of the relapse, as to what stage they would go back to. So the whole point of motivational enhancement therapy is, if you have somebody in one stage, so let's say we have our client in pre-contemplation where they don't think they have a problem, they're not going to do anything about their problem. Our goal in an ideal world is to use motivational enhancement therapy techniques to help them move to the next stage. So we're just trying to help them and motivate them to move to contemplation. So we're not trying to jump all the way to action. And that's, we would love for all of our clients to take action and make changes, but not all of them do. So the point of motivational enhancement therapy is really to help motivate them to the next stage. Now, if they happen to jump forward straight into action, they certainly can do that, and that's wonderful. But really the goal is just from the one stage to the very next one. So that's what you're using all of these techniques we're going to talk about shortly to do. And people may not be in the same stage of change for all of their problems. So for example, somebody who has a substance use issue and also wants to, let's say, exercise 3 times a week. So they have a goal of, or, you know, they've recognized, hey, I want to stop using drugs and I want to exercise 3 times a week. So they may be in different stages of change for each of those issues. So for the drug use, they may be in contemplation. You know, they're aware that their drug use has gotten maybe out of control, and they're thinking, maybe I got an issue that I need to deal with. But with exercise, they may be in preparation where they've joined a gym already, but they haven't started going yet. So depending on what issue I'm working on in any given session with that client, you want to take into account which stage they're in for each of their issues. So if we're talking about and working on their substance use issue, then my goal is to help them move from contemplation into preparation and to use the motivational enhancement skills to move in that direction. And then if we're talking about the exercise goal in session, then I would be using skills to help move them from preparation into action. So we can kind of be all over this wheel of sorts. It doesn't necessarily go in order all the time either. So it's a little bit of a misnomer with all these little arrows connecting, because it doesn't necessarily go in order. But you can, as a counselor, the challenge is to be aware of which stage of change a client is in for any given issue that you're working on, and then use the skills to help them move into the very next stage. So I hope this is all making sense so far. So keep in mind those 5 principles we just talked about and the stages of change as we move into the techniques. So these are on the screen here are the main categories of techniques. These are the kind of the basics of motivational enhancement therapy. And then there's some others that are a little bit more in depth, but these are the big ones that you would use no matter what stage of change people are in, to help them move forward. So the first one's open-ended questions. And we're going to talk about each one of these in depth on subsequent slides. The next is affirmations. Then we have reflections, we have summaries, and we have readiness rulers. So let's dive into each one of these. So first we're going to start with open-ended questions. So you can see on the slide here that when we use questions in counseling, they can either be open or they can be closed. So on the left side of your screen, you should see the list of open questions. So open questions are any question that they have to answer with something more than a yes or a no or a one-word or very short answer. So asking, so what brings you here today, prompts a client to respond in a narrative. You know, they have to kind of explain their answer. They can't just say yes or no, or give you just a one word. Whereas on the right-hand side, you see the closed questions. So do you use marijuana? That's yes or no. So they would answer yes or no. When was the last time you used? They might give you a date. They might say yesterday, but that's still a closed question because it gives you a short answer and kind of doesn't invite the client to talk more or give you more information. Whereas an open-ended question really gives the client the opportunity to answer it however they want and to give you a lot more information. So it kind of keeps them talking when you use open-ended questions versus closed. And also, when you use closed questions, a lot of times it can feel like an interview or an interrogation when you're asking the client question after question and they're answering yes, no, or very short answers. It doesn't really invite them to talk more and get a little bit more in depth. So one of the biggest challenges when you start using motivational enhancement therapy is to be very aware of the questions that you're asking when you're in sessions, and are they open or are they closed? So a good rule of thumb is any sentence that starts with what or how, or even a statement of tell me more about this topic. Those would all be open-ended, where they would be inviting the client to talk more. Whereas if you're finding yourself asking a lot of yes or no questions, those would be closed. And this one, the second one on the closed section where it says, can you tell me how heroin affects you? So the simple fact that you use the word can at the beginning invites a yes or no answer. So you could get an ornery client that when you ask them, can you tell me how heroin affects you? They say, no. Like, no, I can't tell you. So instead, the way you would open that up is just to take off the can you part and use the rest of the sentence. Tell me how heroin affects you. So it's a little bit more of a statement than a question. But that invites them to talk more about, what's going on with them and how substances, particularly heroin in this case, have impacted their life. And then this last one on the closed section, your wife thinks you're addicted to cocaine. Are you? So that invites a yes or no, and doesn't necessarily invite the client to expound upon their answer. So if they say, no, I'm not addicted, then you would have to follow up and ask them to tell you more about it, or you'd have to ask a follow-up question to get more information. So instead, you can ask about, hey, how has cocaine impacted your relationship with your wife? What kinds of ways has cocaine impacted your life? So opening it up really gives them the opportunity to go a lot of different directions, and you get some really valuable therapeutic information that you can, use to help them and to motivate them. And if the other thing I really love about open-ended questions is that it really welcomes the client to talk about, the various ways that they conceptualize their own issues, the ways that they feel that things have impacted their life. And again, that goes a long way to building rapport with a client and expressing empathy, making sure they're feeling welcome and that this is a safe place to talk about all of these issues. So asking more open-ended questions allows you to express empathy with clients and give them the safe space to talk about things that they want to talk about and explore these issues. Okay, so the next is affirmations. So affirmations sometimes can be confused with telling a client they did a good job, and that's not really what we're doing with affirmations. The point of affirmations is really to validate a client and validate that that some of these things are hard to talk about or they're hard to deal with and work on. So an example, this first example, I appreciate how hard it must have been for you to come here. You took a big step. So you're acknowledging that it's a big deal to come to treatment or to come to counseling. And if they're talking about something that was really painful or really difficult, you just acknowledge in the second one, that must have been really difficult for you. Or that must have been painful if they're talking about something that's, sounds like it was painful. Also pointing out potential strengths. So you are clearly a very resourceful person. Could be a strength that you're pointing out, that even though maybe they used their resourcefulness to engage in their addiction, but they can also use that resourcefulness to engage in recovery as well. And then this last one, just kind of as a closure to a session, I've enjoyed talking with you today, or thank you for coming in today, something like that. Just to affirm that this is something that they did. It may have been hard. They made it through. And, now we've come to the end, and just to tie things up. So all of those are examples of affirmations. So as you can see, it's not really saying good job or great work. It's not really cheerleading. It's just acknowledging and validating, the hard work that they're doing, that they're trying, things like that. So I hope you see the difference between affirmations and kind of what I call cheerleading or giving praise, because it's really not about praise. It's more about validation. Okay, so reflections can get really in depth. So we're going to talk about a couple of reflections, but there's certainly plenty others that you can do. So we're going to talk about a simple reflection. We're going to talk about double-sided reflections. We'll talk about shifting focus using a reflection, and reframing using a reflection. So here's a couple of examples of reflections. And starting out with a simple reflection, which is not an example on the screen, but a simple reflection is just basically restating what the client told you. So, so you might say, like, if a client tells you, I'm really struggling with not using substances. So your simple reflection might be, you're really struggling. You're just kind of restating or parroting the response back to the client. And it's kind of a way to show that you're hearing them, that you're listening, you're absorbing what they're saying. And you can kind of use it to highlight a particular word that they used. So in that example where the client said, I'm really struggling with not using substances, I chose to highlight the word struggling. So I say, you're really struggling. And that kind of helps a client focus on the struggle. So you can use that as a way to help the client focus. You can also use it as a way to shift the focus. So if a client says something like maybe they tell you a story about how they went to their old friend's house that they used to use with, and they ended up relapsing. So let's say I really thought it was important to talk about how they got to their friend's house. I would say my reflection would be, you went to your old using buddy's house. So I'm restating what the client said, and so that would be the simple reflection. But then I'm also focusing the client on what I think is therapeutically important to talk about, that this client went to their old friend's house that they used to use with, and then ultimately that did lead to a relapse, but let's talk about how you got to your friend's house. So I can use it as a way to focus the client on a particular thing. And I'm reflecting that back, but also focusing them. So that's a way to use a simple reflection. So a more amplified version of a reflection is really just an exaggeration. So again, you are pointing out to the client what they're saying in a little bit of a more exaggerated way. So in this example on the screen, the client says, I don't know why my wife is worried. I don't drink more than any of my friends. So as a counselor, you might say, so your wife has absolutely no reason to worry. So you're doing a little bit of an interpretation and kind of exaggerating what that client just said. And, the client, theoretically, the client would come back and say, well, she might have a little bit to worry about. I tend to get in trouble when I'm out with my friends, even though they drink more than me. So it kind of gets at that pointing out a discrepancy as well, that, the client doesn't understand why their wife is worried because they don't drink any more than their friends, but they might just be hanging out with people who drink a lot. So no, you may not drink any more than your friends, but all of your friends drink quite a bit, or drink heavily. So you're just pointing out kind of almost the absurdity of what they might be saying, and or the discrepancy that maybe your wife does have a little bit to worry about. So again, thinking about those 5 principles of expressing empathy, supporting self-efficacy, all those 5 things we talked about, you're doing all of this in this, kind of non-judgmental manner. So listen to the difference. If I said to this client, and I used this amplified reflection, if I said, so your wife has absolutely no reason to worry. And my nonverbals, my facial expressions, and my voice is sort of seeping with judgment, that I think that's ridiculous. But if I do it in a softer tone, a more even tone, and I say, so your wife has absolutely no reason to worry, then it kind of invites, because I'm not using a judgmental tone, it invites the client to talk more about, well, maybe there is, a little bit to worry about. So your tone really makes a difference when you're using a reflection as well as your facial expressions. So if you're one of those people that, kind of you can read everything that you're thinking and feeling on your face, then this might be a little bit more of a challenge for you, and you might have to practice. And practice in front of a mirror. I tell my students to do that all the time, because we don't often recognize that we're making facial expressions when we are. And so if you're already working with clients, then my suggestion would be also to videotape yourself every once in a while, obviously with the client's permission, but it gives you a view into, what you might be doing that is sort of an unconscious reaction, and what messages are you communicating to your client just by your facial expressions or your body posture alone. So even though you might be saying things in a calm tone verbally, you may not be saying it on your face in a calm tone or by your body posture. So all of that is important when you're using these skills, because part of motivational enhancement therapy that's really important is that we're not judging our client. We're not trying to engage in an argument. Remember that principle? We want to avoid arguing with clients. So we really just want to invite them to explore all of these kinds of issues. So that's why your nonverbals are just as important as your verbal communication. So one of my favorite skills is using the double-sided reflection. So a double-sided reflection is the primary way to point out discrepancies. So here's an example on the screen. The client says, I know you want me to stop using all drugs, but when I get off papers, I'm going to smoke pot again. So as a counselor, using a double-sided reflection might look like, you can see that there are some real problems here, but you're not willing to think about quitting completely. So you're kind of acknowledging where they're at and also pointing out and trying to develop some discrepancy. So you're saying on the one hand, you got some real problems, and on the other hand, you're not ready to quit. So I put this specific example in here because I wanted to point out the word but. So A lot of people, when doing a double-sided reflection, will use the word but to connect one idea to the other. My suggestion is to replace the word but with the word and. So see the difference. You can see that there are some real problems here, and you're not willing to think about quitting completely. So the and changes things because it's saying that, you know, these two conflicting ideas, you're pointing out to the client that you have these two conflicting ideas that you're trying to have exist simultaneously, and that's probably not going to work. So when you use the word but, you kind of negate everything that you said prior to the word but. And usually people only hear the last part, the last idea, and sort of forget about everything you said before the but. So that's why I like to use the word and. I just think it's a little bit more powerful. So I gave an example earlier about somebody who's hanging out, who wants to be sober, but is hanging out with only drug using friends. So a double-sided reflection there would be, so on the one hand, you want to be clean and sober, and all of your friends use drugs. And that's, you know, who you hang out with. So I'm pointing out to the client that these two ideas can't exist simultaneously. It's probably not going to work out, but I'm doing it in a really kind of non-judgmental, gentle manner. So it's a way of confronting a client or challenging a client without kind of directly confronting so that they get angry and shut down or get defensive and shut down. So again, I want to avoid that argumentation, and I want to develop the discrepancy without engaging in an argument with a client. So this is a really lovely way to do it. Double-sided reflections are probably my favorite motivational enhancement therapy technique because they're just so effective. And the client doesn't realize that you're challenging them. They're just kind of engaging in a conversation. It's a really gentle way to challenge that's really effective as well. So the other thing you're doing with a double-sided reflection is you're reframing an issue. So going back to kind of the reflections we were going to talk about, you can shift the focus and you can also reframe. So I'm restating or reframing what the client said to develop discrepancy using a double-sided reflection. So reflections can be really powerful tools to help clients see that their, behavior isn't quite adding up, that the things that they're trying to change, their behavior is really not getting them to the goals that they're wanting. So again, that idea of moving somebody to the next stage of change, if somebody's in contemplation, like it sounds like this client is here at the bottom, that, they're saying, maybe there's a problem, but I'm not quite ready to do something about it. You're using a double-sided reflection as the counselor to help them potentially move into the next stage, which would be preparation. Okay, so doing a time check, make sure we get through everything, and I leave some time for questions. Okay, so the second to last skill we're going to talk about here is summaries. So summaries are a great thing to use either at the beginning of a session or at the very end of a session to wrap things up. So at the beginning of a session, the way I would use a summary is I would say, okay, hey, George, good to see you today. Last time we met, we talked about, some challenges in your relationship, and we talked about avoiding hanging out with some friends that are big triggers for you. How have you been doing with that since we last met? So it's a way to focus the session right at the beginning and dive right on in. Because sometimes at the beginning of counseling sessions or of groups, we sort of small talk, and, we can get lost in that small talk or that surface level talk and using a summary is a great way to kind of dive into the meat of the session quickly, and to help remind the client, this is what we talked about last time, and so let's start there this time. Now I can also use it in a group. So if I'm doing group counseling, I might say, okay, welcome to group today. Last time we talked about X, Y, and Z, and you all made some goals that you were going to work on between group yesterday and today. So let's start with our check-in and check in with how you're doing with your goal. And then you just go around and everybody checks in and talks about how they did, whether they accomplished their goal, they struggled with it, they didn't do it, whatever. So it helps dive in and focus the session really quickly. And then again, at the end of the session, you can use a summary to close up the session. It also is an indicator to let the client know, hey, we're wrapping up now. And it's a cue that, we're going to be ending the session and it's time to go. So if you have one of those clients that's a talker and they talk a lot and it's hard to kind of get in, and it might be hard to end the session on time because they talk so much. So you might interject and say, hey, I just want to summarize everything we've talked about today because we're, about out of time for today. So we've talked about, we've talked about your relationship. We've talked about struggles with your mom. And you said that you really want to focus on using meditation this week. Okay, so we'll start there when we meet again next time. And you can do the exact same thing in a group session. So we're about ready to close group. So we've talked about this, this, and this, and you've all made a goal, or you've all agreed to try to practice this skill. So we'll start there next time we meet. And then you close group, or you end the session. So it's a great way to summarize. And you might also ask the client, did I miss anything? Just to make sure that you've covered, all of the topics that you talked about in that session. So it's a nice way to start and end the session so that you can, kind of put those boundaries around the session opening and the session closing. And then the last thing we're going to talk about, which is my other favorite motivational enhancement tool, is to use the rulers. So there's 4 rulers that I use pretty consistently. There's the importance ruler and the confidence ruler here. And then the next slide is the readiness ruler and the commitment ruler. So I'll give you an example of how I use these. They're basically scaling questions. So I ask the client, towards the beginning, I use this a lot when I'm doing treatment planning with clients, like trying to figure out what their goals are and how to work towards their goals. So I'll say, okay, tell me, something you want to work on. And the client says, I want to stop using heroin. Okay. So how important to you on a scale of 0 to 10 is it to stop using heroin? 10 being it's the most important thing in the world, 0 being it's not important at all. So the client says, oh, it's a 10. It's so important, top priority. Heroin's ruining my life. Okay, great. Then I go on to the next ruler and I say, okay, on a scale of 0 to 10, how confident are you that you can stop using heroin? So now I'm getting into, do they really think that they can do it? So I'm looking at kind of the self-efficacy piece. So on a scale of 0 to 10, how confident are you that you can stop using heroin? And the client says, oh, I'm not confident at all. I've never been able to do it. So I'm like at a 2. I've been able to stop for a couple days at a time, but that's it. Okay, so now while this goal is really important, they're not very confident that they can achieve the goal. So that's something we might want to work on in sessions or in treatment. So then go to the readiness ruler. So I might say, okay, on a scale of 0 to 10, how ready are you to stop using heroin right now? And they might say, "Ooh, that's really scary. I'm not sure. I don't, I'm not confident I can do it. So maybe I'm like at a 5. I don't know. I'm not quite ready." And then we go down to the commitment ruler and I'm like, okay, well, it's really important to you to stop. It sounds like you're not very confident you can do it because you haven't been able to do it before. And you're not sure that you're ready to stop today. So how committed are you to this goal of stopping using heroin? 0 being not really committed at all, and 10 being, gosh, I'm so committed to this goal. I really, I'm motivated. So let's say the client says, well, I'm like at an 8. I'm really committed to trying. I want to really put forth a good effort and try. I'm not sure I can do it. I'm not sure I'm really ready, but committed to try. Okay. So using these rulers, I've been able to glean a lot of information about what stage of change this client is in. So that helps clue me in to what are the kinds of things we're going to need to do in session. So it sounds like the client might be somewhere around preparation, maybe still a little bit in contemplation, that they recognized it's an issue. They're committed to trying, but they're not really confident to do it, that they can do it, and they're not really ready to quit right this moment. So that tells me that they're probably in preparation. And so that helps guide what I'm going to do with a client in a session. Because if a client is in preparation, or even a little bit back in contemplation, maybe they're kind of in both of those stages, then if I say, okay, I want you to go to a 12-step meeting tomorrow, are they likely to do that? And are they likely to be able to accomplish that? Right now, probably not. So that's not a great intervention to use with the client because they're probably not going to do it. But when they get closer to action and I start to hear them talking about, hey, I've looked up some 12-step meetings. I, think I can fit the Tuesday night one at 5 o'clock into my schedule. Then that's where I'm starting to see that change talk happen. I'm starting to hear them say things about wanting to do something about their issue. So then that would be a good time to maybe say, hey, what do you think about going to a 12-step meeting and just trying it out? See what you think. So go to that Tuesday night meeting at 5. So that's using these rulers are really great indicators for you about where a client's at. And then the nice thing about using these rulers is I can come back and let's say I work with this client for a month and I come back and I say, remember that goal that we talked about where you wanted to stop using heroin? Let's check where you're at with that. And I might ask them these questions all over again and see if these numbers have changed. So maybe their confidence is increased. So maybe they've been able to stop using for a week at a time, whereas before they were only able to do a couple days at a time. Maybe they got on some medication that helped them with their withdrawal symptoms and, medication to help deal with kind of the detox piece of getting off of heroin. So they're feeling better, they're feeling stronger. Maybe their numbers are higher on the readiness ruler, the commitment ruler, or on the confidence ruler. So that can help judge progress for not just you, but also the client. So it helps the client see progress. And again, that just feeds the motivation. And your goal with motivational enhancement therapy is to overcome the ambivalence and the resistance and help motivate them to make, hopefully changes in their life ultimately. So these are a great tool to use and to check in with a client periodically about their progress. So the client can see that their numbers are different and you can see that their numbers are different as well. And you could do this with every goal that they have, but you can also ask them questions like, okay, what would it take to get you to a 6 on the readiness ruler? You said you're at a 5 now. What would it look like if you were at a 6? So that can help figure out what are the next steps. Because if the goal is to move to the next stage of change, then, you know, moving up on the readiness ruler would help get you there. So what would it take to get you to a 6? And then I might also ask, why are you not a 4? Like, what tells you you're a 5? So you can kind of ask several questions around their number as well to judge and help you figure out, you know, kind of the treatment plan of what things can we work on in session to help them move up in their numbers. Okay, so I think we got the idea. So we have a few minutes, about 8 minutes left. What questions do you have? You can either type them in the box, you can raise your hand, or you can just unmute yourself and pipe up and ask a question. Okay, I got a question in the chat, so let's see. Let's see, excellent points you made earlier about the impact on a session of the counselor's expressivity. Okay, from your comments, I'm inferring you might agree that all counselors might benefit from basic acting coaching. Yes, Kent, that's a great point. You know, I tell my students a lot that they need to work on their poker face a little bit, because some people just are very expressive and visually very expressive on their face with their facial expressions. So you might have to practice like not reacting in a facial, you know, when somebody tells you something, not having a look on your face. But also you don't want to look like you're bored and uninterested. So a poker face isn't exactly what you're looking for. You're looking for kind of a pleasant expression, like I'm interested, I'm intrigued, but I'm not judging. So finding that balance can be really challenging. And then being able to hold on to it, because you don't want to just look like a robot or like somebody who's just, you know, sort of staring with this random pleasant look on their face. You know, finding that balance can be really challenging to insert your personality and kind of have things flow, but you know, not be so reactive that you're showing judgment on your face unintentionally. Yeah, it would be a simulation of not reacting. Exactly. Any other questions? Or comments in general? It doesn't have to be a question. Good question about contraindications. You know, there really aren't any. Motivational enhancement therapy works well for most clients. I can't think of a time that it really backfired in my practice or that it didn't work with certain issues. It works particularly well though with clients that, you know, speaking about addictions, were clients that are mandated for some reason, either by the court system or their families, you know, threatening them in some way or going to kick them out or something like that. Works really well for those kind of overtly resistant clients who they're just there to please somebody else. It works particularly well with clients who are just like, yeah, pretty wishy-washy, like ambivalent. I'm just not sure that I have an issue. I'm not sure that I want to do anything about it. Works particularly well with those clients. But I would say in general, there's not specific contraindications. The only thing that's coming to mind is that if you have clients with severe trauma or clients that are more have sociopathy or something like that, that have trouble tapping into feelings or or not really care, it may not work as well. And if you have clients that, I would say the other thing that it works well for is clients that are very intellectual, because it kind of gives them the space to talk and process things. And sometimes people intellectualize things and they have a hard time translating that into action. So it can work particularly well with clients like that. But I don't know that it would be detrimental to any particular group. It just may not be as effective, maybe. So like clients with severe trauma, using a more specific trauma-focused therapy interventions might be better or more effective, but it doesn't mean that motivational interviewing isn't effective. It's just maybe not the best choice. And I use these skills a lot when I'm building rapport with clients, with any kind of client, just at the beginning of seeing clients for any reason, even if it's not substance or addiction related. And then building that kind of treatment plan, like what are we actually going to do? I use the rulers with almost every client, just because it's such an easy way and non-threatening way to gauge where they're at in their goals, and kind of gives me a roadmap of priority wise, what do we work on and what are they really motivated to work on, and start there. And then to kind of gauge their progress, over time through our work together. I go back and revisit the rulers and see if their numbers have changed or their ratings have changed. So I find that to be very useful no matter what client I'm seeing or what issue I'm working on with a client. Any other questions? Okay, so I did have someone ask about the PowerPoint, and I'm happy to share that. I will send that out with your certificates. So you will get an emailed certificate after there's a evaluation and a satisfaction survey and a little test, a little quiz to answer some questions that you'll get an email after we conclude here to fill that out. And then you'll get your certificate within 24 hours. And I will attach this PowerPoint onto that certificate. So you'll get the certificate and the PowerPoint together in a separate email. So check your email shortly for the link to do the little quiz and evaluation, and then be on the lookout for your certificate and the PowerPoint in the next day or so. And let us know if you don't receive those things. Make sure you check your spam and junk folder before you reach out to us, because sometimes they go to those folders. All right, well, thank you so much, and y'all have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you soon.